Martin Scorsese had already been working on Killers of the Flower Moon for a few years when he had a startling revelation. He and screenwriter Eric Roth were adapting David Grant's 2017 nonfiction book about a series of murders of Osage people in Oklahoma in the early 1920s with the intention that Leonardo DiCaprio would play the FBI agent who solves the crimes. Scorsese, who grew up watching and loving Westerns, could see it all in his head. He gets off the train, Scorsese says. We see his boots, we tilt up, he's got a Stetson hat, looks around. He doesn't say anything. It was just so easy to picture. And that was the problem. I really felt I had seen the film before, Scorsese says. It's Harry Carey Sr., it's Walter Houston in Law and Order, the 1932 Western. You go all the way up to the young Clint Eastwood. What am I going to do with DiCaprio? And where's the soul of it? Though the story of the Osage was little known, the Western procedural they were planning to make felt similar to Hollywood history in ways that they didn't want to replicate. After a table read in early 2020, the collaborators, including DiCaprio, began to fear the story underplayed the experience of the Osage people and repeated tired tropes. We didn't want to go much further with this great white hope saving Native Americans, says Roth. The solution was to reframe the story around a much more complicated pair of characters in the book, a mysterious marriage between a wealthy Osage woman named Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, and a shifty World War I veteran named Ernest, played by DiCaprio. What I felt was really exciting is that the relationship is the microcosm for the larger conversation you're having, Gladstone says. You're humanizing these characters more, and in doing that, the history hits you harder. During the film's development, Scorsese had met with members of the Osage community in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, including Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear, the principal chief of the Osage Nation. The filmmaker wanted to discuss how he intended to portray the dark era in their history known as the Reign of Terror, when Osages who had become rich after oil was struck on their land were being systematically murdered for their oil rights. I was anxious, Scorsese says. I knew that if I could not gain their trust, then there's no sense in making the film. As a European American, a Sicilian American, I may have natural limitations, and I hoped that they would forgive that. But they had to know it was coming from the right place and not a surface revisionism, which is simplistic. I wanted something really complex that deals with humanity. The meeting lasted for hours. One of the people in the room said, "You have to be very careful. You're putting words in the mouths of people that. These are real people to us. They're part of our families." Scorsese's humility and his body of work, in particular his 2016 movie Silence, which depicted Christian missionaries in 17th century Japan, helped reassure Standing Bear and others that the project was intended to be a serious and respectful one. Together with his researcher and executive producer, Marianne Bauer, Scorsese sought to involve as many Osage as possible in the production. He would cast Osage actors in more than 40 roles, not including the hundreds who worked as background players. Osage elder John Williams became the film's cultural consultant. Van Bighorst, director of the Osage Nation Language Program, oversaw the use of the Osage language in the film. Julie O'Keefe served as the Osage costume advisor, and artist Addie Roanhorse was brought on to assist with production design. Smaller crew jobs were filled by Osage, too. On the day the production filmed an explosion in which Osage people died, a production assistant in the camera department happened to be the nephew of a man who had looked for survivors of that explosion and recovered bodies. It's not just a story that someone came up with, or even a historical event that's detached from us, says cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto. We were around the people who lived this, so it felt like we really had this responsibility to do it right. Scorsese cast Gladstone, who is of Blackfeet and Namipo heritage and had recently starred in Kelly Reichardt's Certain Women, after a Zoom meeting in which they bonded about Catholicism, Gladstone says. Gladstone felt a connection between her character and the great-grandmother for whom she's named, who embodied both her indigenous culture and one brought by Jesuit missionaries. Molly had a sense of herself as an Osage woman coming from a community where women own everything. Women are in charge of all the commerce, Gladstone says. And then also some of the worldview that would have been imposed through Catholicism and boarding school. There's a level of denial there that I think a lot of people who come from Catholic circles are pretty familiar with. During the production, Gladstone had significant input into her portrayal. In one scene, Gladstone and the actresses playing her sisters came to Scorsese with an idea. They had some dialogue that they thought was more interesting from the women's point of view. And I said, "Great, let's hear it," Scorsese says. In the scene, the women are watching the men play a game. The women pitched Scorsese that they would be comparing the men to types of animals. Molly calls Ernest a coyote, a sign she's in on his while. Scorsese went with it. "Well, he's a coyote," Scorsese says. The bad boys are attractive. Despite being new to Scorsese's set and his family of longtime collaborators, Gladstone felt she could speak her mind. "My sense of self is different," Gladstone says. "Thinking about Molly always would help me set aside any Lily nervousness. I didn't want to get too in my head about it, about the magnitude of what was happening. These men are titans for a reason. They're just so committed to the work, and they don't just set a space for you at the table. They expect you to bring a dish.